Manhunt 2 is one of the most controversial video game ever made. From gruesome violence to mind-twisting story, Manhunt 2 shows almost little to no boundary, even though the story of Manhunt 2 is much more revealing than the first one. You can still come up with some of the darkest theories ever. In this video, we will take a look at the iceberg of disturbing theories surrounding Manhunt 2, and the lower we go, the lower goes our humanity. Controversy of Manhunt 2. When Manhunt 1 was made, it received heavy backlash from the public for being very violent and in some regions received adults-only rating. However, after the sequel, things didn't change and got even worse. Manhunt 2 got rated adults only again, and even though Rockstar has put out other versions of this game which is mature, the PC version still to this day is rated adults only and is also banned in a ton of countries, which is why there is currently not a single legal way to play Manhunt 2 on any platforms. The game is also not sold in the PlayStation Store. This happened because unlike the first game, Manhunt 2 actually has interactive executions, which is basically the executions from the first game, except you have to imitate the movement of your mouse, exactly like the movement of the execution itself. The theory that I have here is sometimes the more violent executions will not be the red executions, which are generally the most brutal ones. This is because if you actually pay notice, when the marker turns red, you don't always get more violent necessarily, but more sadistic, which pairing up with the interacting executions makes up for a gaming experience very few games can match, which is probably why it got adults only. Leo is Claude Speed. Claude is the main protagonist of Grand Theft Auto 3, so why is this a theory? Simply because Claude and Leo look very similar, not to mention they are both psychopaths as well, which makes sense as to why Leo and Claude might be the same, even though they are factually not. There are definitely some inspirations taken from Claude when Leo was designed. Daniel Lamb's past. Daniel Lamb's past is quite known. He's a scientist who graduated from San Fierro University in 1985 with a degree in biochemistry. Fast forward, after he was married and had 2 kids, he decided to become the Pigment Project's latest test subject. The story might paint the picture of Daniel being a good person, but his decisions paint something completely different. For money, Daniel knowingly became a soldier for the project. He knew that if everything turned right, he might end up killing someone whether he wanted it or not. Daniel most certainly also knew what the project was doing behind the scenes, which we will discuss later on, and still decided to go down this route for money, which means part of him always wanted money more than anything. But knowing you might kill people and still being okay with it means you have always been evil. It's just now, evil has started to show its usefulness. Same universe of Grand Theft Auto. This is a fact and not really a theory, though never implied directly. Just like Manhunt 1, Manhunt 2 is also set in the same universe of Grand Theft Auto. You can still find sprunk vending machines and other Grand Theft Auto related stuff in the game, and as both Manhunt games are also in the same universe, it only makes sense that Manhunt 2 and the upcoming Grand Theft Auto game, which we all know by now is Grand Theft Auto 6, will share the same universe. Dixmoor Hospital for the Criminally Insane. Dixmoor Asylum is a huge mental asylum located somewhere in Cottonmouth in Manhunt 2. The asylum was established in 1932. Beyond this, not much is actually known about the asylum. We do know that the project most likely owns it so it can run its operations within it. We can see the subjects here as well. What makes this hospital horrifying is when you think of its twisted ways of working. Generally, hospitals for criminally insane are meant for people that are insane and need serious help. But in this case, completely normal people are being turned into insane beings and have various tests done on them, which is why the theory goes that Dixmoor Hospital for the criminally insane might actually have a double meaning. Cottonmouth is the best location for the project. In Manhunt 1, Carcer City was full of corruption, which made it the perfect place to film snuff. But what about Cottonmouth? The scariest thing is that Cottonmouth is far safer than Carcer City, which means civilians' lives are being endangered. You can even find them living with their families and children as well. Then how the project had such a good control over the city? They hired private militia to help their cause and to capture Daniel. Doing so, they endangered a lot of civilians' lives. Not to mention, the project's funding was cut off completely by the government due to controversial work methods discovered here. So, why the government didn't do anything about any of it, we don't know that, but it could be because they wanted to stay as far away as possible from the project and to not let the world know what they funded, which is why Cottonmouth being the location for the project to test their experiment is far worse than making snuff at Carcer. Cottonmouth might be near Vice City. It seems like this is a very popular theory that is being floating around the internet. Vice City is one of the most iconic cities in gaming. Not to mention, we are going back to it once more with the arrival of Grand Theft Auto 6. But so far, I simply could not find any information that 100% confirms this theory. Who knows if in Grand Theft Auto 6 we get to see Cottonmouth at all or not, though I would not hold on to hopes for it. JC and Sons billboard. As we have already discussed this on the Manhunt 1 Disturbing Theories Iceberg, you can find JC and Sons billboard in Manhunt 2. JEC is a reference for James Earl Cash, the main protagonist of Manhunt 1. According to a popular theory, it is believed that he, along with his son, started a construction business. But what most people seem to totally look past is at the fact that the mission where you see the billboard happen, it actually takes place 6 years earlier than present time of Manhunt 2. Manhunt 2 present time takes place after Manhunt 1. Because of that, it makes no sense for Cash to be in a construction business, as he was a hitman working for others. Legions are failed experiments. Legions are disfigured-faced prisoners. They are slightly different than the rest of the prisoners, and they are the first of enemies that Daniel has to fight in the beginning of the game. It seems that they were also test subjects like Daniel himself, but unlike Daniel, something went horribly wrong with their experiments, and it resulted them having their face being disfigured. Not much is known beyond this, but one thing that is unique about them as enemies is that not all legions are constantly fighting or hostile towards the player, which makes me wonder if some of them are actually not insane, but instead they are in heavy pain with their disfigured face and trauma, which might drive them insane. Manhunt 2 clothing items in GTA Online. GTA Online has added a lot of clothing items and even tattoos over the years that is related to Manhunt, but I could not find a single Manhunt 2 clothing item here at all. It's as if Rockstar doesn't even want to be associated with this game. They not only don't sell the game at all, but also does not reference the game. I think it's safe to say they probably weren't too proud to make this game and wanted to not be associated with it. Otherwise, I have no earthly clue on why they have no Manhunt 2 clothing item in GTA Online. By the way, the game gets constantly updated, so it might happen that I miss a clothing item or anything related to Manhunt 2 by chance. Please do let me know in the comments if there are any items in GTA Online regarding Manhunt 2, as I am sure you will. Dixmoor Asylum used to have female inmates. When the game begins, we see only male inmates around us. The only female character is Dr. Laura White, who is being strangled by Daniel, but no female inmates. They wanted to create soldiers, which is why men are the perfect pick for that. But also, it could be that they tried a lot of experiments on women, including pregnant women, which went south or was just not worth it, which might have made them drop the female inmates. Hanging White Rabbit. The White Rabbit carried a shotgun and was a trap for Cash. Cash was tasked to kill the White Rabbit, when in reality it was a trap so the Cerberus could get Cash in his tracks. Unfortunately for them, Cash was the better killer and killed them all, including the White Rabbit. In Manhunt 2, you can find the same White Rabbit. There are theories out there which states that it could be that the White Rabbit was connected with the project and the snuff. While that is not totally out of the question, it could also be that it's simply an Easter egg by Rockstar to reference the first game and not much else. Bloodhounds mentioning events of the first game. Bloodhounds are one of the hunters in Manhunt 2. Like all other hunters, they have their lines, and some of the lines will actually refer back to Carcer. However, other than mentioning Carcer, not much is being told. I believe that in Carcer City some of these bloodhounds participated, but they were not active during the night Cash was available. Because of the snuff being exposed to the world, it could be that they moved on, but then heard about the project, and because its method of disposal was very similar to the methods of snuff, they decided to join in. Valiant Video Enterprises is still ongoing in Manhunt 2. Valiant Video Enterprises were the distributors of the snuff films made and directed by Starkweather. However, it's most likely they're still around. Just because Starkweather was exposed does not mean they have to stop their distribution, which is why it could be very likely that Valiant Video Enterprises still distributes snuff made by other directors or individual groups. This will make more sense in an upcoming theory where we will talk more about this. Mr. Nasty's the horse mask guy in Sexual Deviance. Mr. Nasty is known as the producer of snuff directed by Starkweather. He basically funds the production of snuff films in Carcer City. Not much is known about the character himself, as it was never revealed by Rockstar who even is Mr. Nasty. It seems like a popular theory to have that the horse mask guy is Mr. Nasty, and I will admit, there is actually a big chance it could be Mr. Nasty, but also that it could not be. But just like the last theory, we will talk more about this in an upcoming theory where it will all make sense. No Manhunt 3. It took Rockstar a long time to get both Manhunt games into store shelves because of all the rating related issues. After Manhunt 2, we got no other Manhunt titles thus far, and it seems that will forever be the case, as I have stated before that Rockstar might not want to be associated with another Manhunt game. After all, the controversies that has happened, though we have no real answer to why Manhunt 3 never came out. I think we can look back at the culture of Rockstar to see why it never happened. When Manhunt 2 dropped, the people working on the game thought they might have made a game very brutal and violent just for the sake of making it, which tells us everything we need to know. Manhunt 2 was so violent from the get-go that making another violent game, or another Manhunt game in this case, and making it less brutal than the last one would be doing a disservice to the franchise, which might be why we never saw another Manhunt game. It could also be that it's not worth the hassle to work so hard in making a game, only to see it not being sold or at a limited capacity. With that being said, we will never know why Manhunt 3 never released, but maybe, just maybe, if GTA Online wasn't a thing, we might have had a chance to see this bastard come back to life. Leo might be a real person. It is not completely clear if Leo was a real person or not in the game. As most other things Manhunt, it seems that Leo Casper was a real agent of the government, but the game never tells you anything about him at all. If Leo was a real person, then how did the project take his personality? On the other hand, Leo was a stone-cold killer with no conscience, which makes it more terrifying to learn that his personality be planted to another man could turn them into a stone-cold killer, no matter who they were. Daniel always found a way to justify his killings, no matter what, through the help of Leo. So, it could be that Leo himself always justified the lust of killing anyone and everyone, regardless of their character, age, gender, or race. It could be that the government funded the project because the government realized the potential of such a killing machine and wanted to clone him via this method to create soldiers that obeys. Of course, there are no clues about any of this in the game, but if it were to happen, then the government is not as innocent as you might have thought. Canon ending. Unlike the first one, this game has two endings. One is considered the good ending, while the other one is considered the bad ending. In the good ending, Daniel finally fights Leo in his mind and is being able to live a normal life. On the downside, he forgot who he is, but then again, after the nightmare, it might have been the better thing that had happened to him. In the bad ending, Daniel fights Leo in his mind, but Leo wins and stays in Daniel's head forever. There is no indication to which might be the actual ending, so we can only come up with theories here. In my opinion, after what Daniel did, it makes more sense that Leo would have been in his mind forever. But then again, he did love his wife and kids, but he did kill his wife, which ultimately made him hate Leo so much that he killed him in his mind. But I will still say that after what Daniel did, it makes more sense that Leo never really died, and Daniel was the last and successful experiment by the project. Also, it was so hard to finally implement Leo into someone, so it makes more sense that it's not so easy to get rid of that just by fighting in one's mind, because that would mean the idea of planting a latent personality is not future-proof, which is something the government would not have wanted. Hidden camera in Lamp's residence. In the second episode, Ghosts, you can find a hidden camera in Daniel's house, which is very creepy when you realize that the project was watching Daniel's family. It could have been that Daniel never told this to his wife, as his wife was already opposed to the idea of Daniel having a second personality, let alone keeping a camera in their house to let the project spy on his family. Most likely the camera is there to see if Daniel acts in the way the project wants him to act or not. But still, considering how disturbing the project and their working methods are, it's pretty bad to have a hidden camera in a house of a full family and children. Pervs and other hunters. Pervs are the hunters you get to fight in the third chapter, Sexual Deviants. It seems like they torture other people and kill them as well. Pervs are also the only hunter gang in the game that has female characters. But why exactly the perverts do what they do? Why do they kill innocent people? The guy that gets brutally killed is a porn star that can be seen in the theater, but that still makes him a civilian. And why does he get killed? Not to mention, it was also being recorded, and the pervs also had a direct connection with the project, as it was confirmed in the third episode of the game when we see the horse mask guy is talking to a doctor who then tells Daniel to go to a hotel. It could be that they worked on the porn seen in the theater, and since they are criminals, they did not want him, the civilian in this case, to know about it. But why did they kill him in a brutal fashion? Well, we will get more into it in the upcoming theory in the fifth layer of this iceberg. Journalist ended up in the Dixmoor hospital. As we know, when Manhunt 1 ends, the journalist exposes stark weather. However, the journalist could not cope with what she saw happen in the making of the snuff, so she started to go insane. The theory goes by that she could have ended up in the Dixmoor asylum, which if true, will line up with the previous theory of female inmates being admitted into Dixmoor Hospital. But there is no proof of it at all. It could have been that they did their experiments on her as well, but it was of no use. We really can't go on into this theory any deeper due to the lack of information on what happened to her after the first game ends. But it is quite a dark theory nonetheless, cause if it were true, that would mean the poor journalist who wanted to expose evil got faced with unfair punishment that she truly did not deserve. Warning: the following layer of the iceberg has some of the most disturbing subject matters of the entire iceberg. Viewer discretion is advised. The project produces snuff. I have mentioned snuff a couple of times in this video, but I think I should explain exactly what it is. Snuff is a pornographic film or video recording of an actual murder. People who watch snuff uses it to sexually satisfy their desires. In Manhunt 1, James was put in a snuff film ring, and so he had to kill others brutally in order to survive. It is a very big possibility that the project might actually produce snuff. There are hidden cameras that are recording people getting killed and murdered in very violent ways in sexual deviance. It could also mean that because the government stopped funding the projects, they needed money, so they partnered up with actual snuff producers in order to not only get hunters required for the project, but also to produce snuff on the side in order to earn extra money and keep the project afloat. As disturbing as it may sound, it could be very true. And also, it would mean that both the snuff producers and the project might had a symbiotic relation, which could explain on why they have a ton of cameras recording the brutal death of others. All of those theories could be true if the project really produces snuff. IRL killers referenced. Just like Manhunt 1, we have real serial killers who are referenced in this game. However, unlike the previous one, unfortunately there aren't as many references I could find, which makes sense, since unlike the first game you don't really have any boss battles except for Leo or Danny. So, let's start off with Daniel Lamb. Daniel Lamb is a reference of Zodiac Killer. As you can see, the similarities between the Zodiac Killer's sketch and Daniel are spot on, as Rockstar Games was probably inspired by this sketch when they were making Daniel Lamb. The Zodiac Killer is the pseudonym of an unidentified serial killer who operated in Northern California in the late 1960s. The case has been described as the most famous unsolved murder case in American history. The Zodiac murdered 5 known victims in the San Francisco Bay Area between December 1968 and October 1969, operating in rural, urban, and suburban settings. He targeted young couples and a lone male cab driver. His known attacks took place in Benicia, Vallejo, and the city of San Francisco proper. 2 of his wounded victims survived. The Zodiac claimed to have murdered 37 victims. He has been linked to several other cold cases, some in Southern California or outside the state. Why he killed or the motives behind them are unknown. Though the police marked the case inactive in 2004, they reopened the case prior to March 2007. However, as you have already guessed it, he is still to this day unknown. There have been only one person ever who was suspected to be Zodiac, and he was Arthur Leigh Allen. If you want to know a lot more about this killer, film director David Fincher has directed the movie Zodiac, and I will recommend you watch it. According to some fans on Reddit, Leo Casper might be a reference of Ted Bundy. If you actually take a look, they have very similar looking faces. Theodore Robert Bundy was an American serial killer who kidnapped, raped, and murdered dozens of young women and girls during the 1970s, and possibly earlier. After more than a decade of denials, he confessed to 30 murders committed in 7 states between 1974 and 1978. His true victim total is unknown. His usual technique involved approaching a female in public and luring her to a vehicle parked in a more secluded area, at which point she would be beaten unconscious, restrained with handcuffs, and taken elsewhere to be sexually assaulted and killed. To this end, Bundy typically simulated having a physical impairment, such as an injury, in order to convince his target that he was in need of assistance with something, or would dupe her into believing he was an authority figure. He frequently revisited the bodies of those he abducted, groomed, and performing sex acts on the corpses until decomposition and destruction by wild animals made further interactions impossible. He decapitated at least 12 of his victims, keeping their severed heads as mementos in his apartment. On a few occasions, he broke into homes at night and bludgeoned, maimed, strangled, or sexually assaulted his victims in their sleep. In 1975, Bundy was arrested and jailed in Utah for aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault. He then became a suspect in a progressively longer list of unsolved homicides in several states. Facing murder charges in Colorado, Bundy engineered 2 dramatic escapes and committed further assaults in Florida, including 3 murders, before his ultimate recapture in 1978. For the Florida homicides, he received 3 death sentences in 2 trials and was executed at Florida State Prison in Rayford on January 24, 1989. Bundy once described himself as the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet, a statement with which attorney Paulie Nelson, a member of his last defense team, agreed. Ted, she wrote, was the very definition of heartless evil. Some Red Kings might be necrophiliacs. Necrophilia is the act of having sexual intercourse with a corpse, though you will never see them commit necrophilia in the game, according to some dialogue, such as, "Good thing I'm a necrophiliac," and "Let the loving commence," which can be heard upon them killing the player. They are necrophiliacs, fitting into Manhunt 2's theme of sexuality and sexual abuse. Also, one Red King member is seen patrolling around a damp room with what appears to be a TV with porn on. Danny is in coma. This is a big theory, and a popular one as well. It could be that the entire game we played was him in coma, and things that were happening in the actual game was only in his brain. It could have been that Daniel was really an insane person. And this entire game was him basically justifying reasons of killing people in brutal ways by putting himself in the best possible scenario, of course all in his head. So, by the time the game ends, his brain is erased completely and he's found a new man. Of course, it is simply just a theory, but it might be one of the darkest theory ever. Just imagine a guy who finds pleasure in killing others brutally, so much to the point he creates a story in his mind to convince his supposed world that the people he killed wasn't his doing as he was out of control. Unknown creatures looking like fetus. When Danny goes after Pikmin, you can actually find these very weird looking creatures. At first glance, they will make you feel very unsettled. Just look at the faces. Rockstar definitely added a ton of detail there to make this creature look that way. Because this game is in the same universe of Grand Theft Auto, you could tell it might be an alien they found and kept here. But when I looked at them for the first time, I thought they looked a lot like Nyland. He is the final boss of Half-Life. It could be an Easter egg about him, as in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, I believe. You had a Half-Life reference found in the mission where you had to steal a jetpack. You could find a crowbar there. So, it might be Rockstar giving the respects to one of the most influential video game ever made. Or it could be an alien that the project found and wanted to do the experiments on. Or it could be newborn, taken away from their mothers to be worked on as a subject for the experiment, which would have made even more sense if the previous theory of them working on female inmates was true or confirmed. Regardless, we might never know what they really are. Heavily inspired by Unit 731. This is the last theory, and by far, this is the darkest one I could think of. Before the website existed for Manhunt 2, you could apparently find these pictures of experiments and details of them that were jotted down. If you actually read these, you can feel very uneasy. When I read them, I felt like this was inspired by Unit 731. Unit 731, short for Manchu Detachment 731, and also known as the Camo Detachment 198, and the Ishii Unit was a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army that engaged in lethal human experimentation and biological weapons manufacturing during the Second Sino-Japanese War, which existed from 1937 to 1945, and World War II. It killed an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 people. It was based in the Pingfang district of Harbin, the largest city in the Japanese puppet state of Manchukuo, and had active branch offices throughout China and Southeast Asia. Unit 731 was responsible for some of the most notorious war crimes committed by the Japanese armed forces. It routinely conducted tests on people who were dehumanized and internally referred to as logs. Experiments included disease injections, controlled dehydration, biological weapons testing, hypobaric pressure chamber testing, vivisection, organ harvesting, amputation, and standard weapons testing. Victims included not only kidnapped men, women, including pregnant women and children, but also babies born from the systemic rape perpetrated by the staff inside the compound. The victims also came from different nationalities, with the majority being Chinese and a significant minority being Russian. Additionally, Unit 731 produced biological weapons that were used in areas of China not occupied by Japanese forces, which included Chinese cities and towns, water sources, and fields. Estimates of those killed by Unit 731 and its related programs range up to 500,000 people, and none of the inmates survived. In the final moments of the Second World War, all prisoners were killed to conceal evidence. It was officially known as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. Unit 731 was taken over and commanded until the end of the war by General Shiro Ishii, a combat medic officer in the Quantum Army. Now, let's talk about the experiments they did, and I apologize for my pronunciations. Prisoners were injected with diseases disguised as vaccinations to study their effects, to study the effects of untreated venereal diseases. Male and female prisoners were deliberately infected with syphilis and gonorrhea, then studied. Prisoners were also repeatedly subjected to rape by guards. Thousands of men, women, children, and infants interned at prisoner of war camps were subjected to vivisection, often performed without anesthesia and usually lethal. In a video interview, former Unit 731 member Okawa Fukumatsu admitted to having vivisected a pregnant woman. Vivisections were performed on prisoners after infecting them with various diseases. Researchers performed invasive surgery on prisoners, removing organs to study the effects of disease on the human body. They have committed a ton of terrible atrocities during the war, but when the war came to an end, they were caught for their actions. Shiro Ishii was given a deal by the United States, and it was that they would grant him immunity if he simply handed over the data he found doing these terrible things he called experiments. And indeed, that was the case. Shiro Ishii never faced justice for his actions, and for the rest of his life, he lived a rather comfortable one. The United States helped cover up the human experimentations and handed stipends to the perpetrators. The Americans co-opted the researchers' bioweapons information and experience for use in their own biological warfare program, much like what had been done with Nazi Germany researchers in Operation Paperclip. Now here are the documents of each experiment. Keep in mind, some of these are scrapped from the game, as the game has levels that are scrapped from it. These experiments are called FR32, Cavus, Eminus, Milton IV, Pravitas, and last but not least, Rivera 7, Usage Simulation. You can also find these on the Manhunt 2 wiki as well if you want to read them, but I personally felt like it is inspired by Unit 731. But of course, it will always remain just a theory, by far the darkest I could imagine. We have come to an end of the Iceberg. It is definitely darker than the first one. It is a shame that Rockstar rushed this game, as it really had the potential to be the better sequel by all means. Though Unit 731 happened during World War II, it seems like we are almost on the verge of getting the long-awaited sequel, World War III. Stay safe and just be happy with your surroundings and your family. And remember, as long as you're alive, you are lucky. Thanks for watching. Perfect Enrager, signing out.